Good evening, everybody. I'm Diana Brown from Nantucket Community Sailing, and we are really happy to be working with the NHA this summer to host the Sailor Scuttlebutt series. So thank you for coming tonight. It's my privilege to introduce Gary Jobson. Gary is one of the top sailors in the world, and he is truly a global ambassador for the sport of sailing. He's renowned for his outstanding sailing and his leadership. Just as an example of some of the things he's done. He's competed in 5,600 races and has won a lot of them, including many of the world's ocean races. He was recognized twice as College Sailor of the Year. He is a winning America's Cup tactician with Ted Turner on Courageous. He has led sailing expeditions around the world, including Antarctica and the Arctic and Cape Horn, and most recently Sable Island, which you'll hear a little bit about tonight. He's been a longtime television commentator, and he has won 2 Emmys for his coverage. He's the author of 19 books on sailing, including, which I can't help myself but make a plug, Nantucket, a Sailing Community, which we'll have upstairs on the roof, and he'll be happy to autograph copies. Thank you, Gary. In addition to all of his sailing accomplishments, he's also a leader in promoting the sport of sailing, and he is in many key leadership positions right now. He's Vice President of World Sailing, which is the global sailing organization. He's the past president of U.S. Sailing. He's the president of the National Sailing Hall of Fame. He's also chairman of the board of a hospital, the Anne Arundel Medical Center, a 420-bed hospital in Maryland. And also, really importantly, Gary has chaired the Leukemia Cup since 1993 and has raised over $62 million to help fight leukemia. Congratulations on that, Gary.
Thanks. Thank you.
What you probably might not know about Gary is a strong connection to Nantucket. He has a lot of friends here on island. He was one of the founders of Great Harbor Yacht Club and helped develop and continues to advise their sailing program. He's been the honorary chair of Nantucket Race Week for almost 15 years now. And importantly to me personally, he's been a wonderful supporter of Nantucket Community Sailing, and I really do appreciate everything you've done for us. He has given about 2,600 lectures, and he counts. So he's practicing for tonight, so tonight's going to be 2601, and it's going to be really great. Please join me in welcoming Gary Jobson.
Thanks. Thank you very much. So I'm staying at the guest house up in 99 Main Street. And the way these bedrooms are connected is there's kind of a shared bath, something from 1938. And there's a woman next door, and she says, "I'm the speaker tomorrow night." And we walk down the street and cup here, and tell me your name again. So tomorrow night, David Sobel, you're one of my heroes. She wrote this unbelievable book about longitude several years ago, amongst other things. And I now feel like I'm in a celebrity. So I'm actually going to sit down. You do your lecture here. I want to hear you. Anyway, we look forward to seeing you, Dava, tomorrow night. Thanks. I'm honored that you are here. And I did get out to the Great Point this afternoon with a really longtime friend of mine, and I could see when we went past Nantucket Community Sailing, all the dinghies out there. And Diana, you're making life better for lots of kids, and it really makes a big difference. And there's an article in the New York Times today about somebody that gave up his job in Hawaii, and he's now teaching kids to sail. And the great thing about our sport is you get to go to a lot of places, you get to meet a lot of people, and it lasts your entire life. I mean, I'm 68, and I'm still racing. I don't win as much as I did, but I still do okay out there on the water. So here's the format for the night. James Russell, asked me to talk for about 50 minutes, but I'm going to do 4 hours. The doors are locked. No. I'm going to tell a couple quick stories, and then I brought some pictures to show, and I hope you enjoy it. And I narrate everything live, and it's kind of free form. I'm not really scripted, so I hope you enjoy this. And I like looking at the pictures, I hope, as much as you do too. I say this at the risk of sounding braggy. I have sailed in as many places as you possibly can sail in this world in all the years that I've been racing. And I can't think of a better place to sail in the summertime than Nantucket. That sound out there is magic. It's intellectually challenging, going around the different parts, all the geography and the currents, and the wind is good. So just know, when you want to go sailing, if you like this sport, this is the best place. February, not so cool. And those northeasters, I'm not sure that would have been fun, but it's really a special place. So I'm going to open up with a little story. And it's a story about how sometimes people help you out, and you don't know they're helping you out, but you might find out years later, and there's some lessons to learn. So lucky me. Can you imagine, 27 years old, I hook up with Ted Turner, and I'm a tactician on America's Cup yacht. Very cool. And as a tactician, you're in the back of the boat, you're in charge of things, you're calling the shots. But Ted, looking at this young guy, didn't want his tactician to get too big ahead. So on the water, I'm calling the shots. Of course, nobody out in the water, they just see white sails. And on land, my job was sanding the bottom of the boat when we came in. Remember that old film, Wax On? That was me on the bottom of the 12-meter. And I learned a really good lesson. We had this one really good day early in the trials, and Ted's standing there, and Robbie Doyle was a Harvard All-American, was trimming her sails. I'm the tactician, and we won this race. And the press is there, 100 people or so. So, Ted, how did you win today? Well, with a tactician like Jobson calling the wind shifts and Robbie Doyle trimming the sails, making us go fast, I had nothing to do with it. These guys are the guys that make it happen. The very next day, we got clobbered in the race. I got us off on the wrong side of the course. Robbie put the wrong jib up. It was total disaster. Same press corps. Ted, after your great day yesterday, what happened today? And Turner says, I had a bad day. And I learned from it, and we're going to do a little bit better. And the lesson right there was, well, when you're doing well, spread it around. And when you don't do well, take the blame yourself. Very cool. So that summer, the June trials were great for us. We went 10-1, beating 2 brand new boats, skippered by the best sailmakers in the world, Lowell North Sails, and Ted Hood. Pretty good, and we're feeling good. But in the July trials, we started losing races. In fact, we lost 6 races in a row, and the press was writing, well, the older boat, Courageous, clearly is outgunned now, and the sailmakers have found their own, and Turner did a good job, but it's kind of over. And we're all confused and upset. We get the word after the 6th defeat that the next morning, the New York Yacht Club's America's Cup Selection Committee wants to come down and talk to us on the crew. My God, we had our uniforms cleaned up and every winch polished up. And at 7:30 in the morning, all 8 members with their New York Yacht Club straw hats, and yes, they were wearing blazers, bam, came through the gate. And if you can believe this, all 8 of them had the same first name, Commodore. So one of the Commodores, a guy named Bob Bevere, who at the time was publisher of Yachting Magazine, Princeton All-American and national champion in college, and former Commodore of the New York Yacht Club, and he had skippered Constellation to victory in the America's Cup in 1964, and he looks at me and says, Mr. Jobson, can you and I have a word? And we literally go behind a tool shed, and there was a couple milk carton crates there, and we sit there, and I clearly remember the way he's kind of smoking on his cigarette, and I'm nervous. And he says, you know, we've been watching you carefully all summer. Let me tell you something. You are by far the best dinghy sailor out there in the water. Nobody could sail a laser or a small boat like you. But lately you've gotten a little tentative out there, and we see you making the mistakes. So here's what you're going to do. Not this is what we suggest. This is what you're going to do. Number 1, pretend you're just racing a small boat. Number 2, just go out and have fun. Ted's going to listen to you, and we'll have confidence that you'll be okay. The next day is Sunday. The Sunday New York Times is on. We love reading about ourselves in the Globe, and there's a Sunday, and there's a full-page article written by a guy named William Wallace, and it says, Patience at Jobson, key to Turner's success. a whole page article of my name. There it is in the New York Times. And, at the time, oh man, this is going to calm Ted down. After we get down to the boat, David Ray, who owns the Clark Cookhouse, the candy store in Newport, comes over and says, "Gentlemen, I know you're having a rough patch here, but when you defend the cup, I'm going to present each of you with a gold card, and it's going to be good for drinks for the rest of your life in my establishment." By the way, last summer I tested the gold card out. It still worked. Of course, I left a $20 tip, but... So Bevere has got me feeling good. There's this article in the New York Times. It's the last race of the July trials. We're behind at the first mark, but we ground them down, and we went on to win the race. It was a great confidence booster. We never lost again in the August trials, and we went on to defend the Cup against the Australia 4 straight races. Fast forward, 33 years later, I've spoken to a group in Pequot Yacht Club in Connecticut, and I have a new book out, and I'm signing books, and there's people coming by, and there's this older gentleman with silver hair, and I said, "Yes, sir, what's your name? I'll sign the book for you." He says, "William Wallace." "Did you write for the New York Times?" I asked. He goes, "Yes, and I wrote about you." And I said, "Oh, I remember you wrote this article, Patience at Jobson, Key to Turner's Success." And I have to tell you, Mr. Wallace, that article was really good and calmed Ted down. And this guy kind of looks up at him and he says, "Ted, I got a call from Bob Bevere, who told me that this young tactician on Courageous needed a little confidence boost. So I wrote that article to get your confidence up there." And I realized at that moment the long tentacles of the New York Yacht Club. So anyway, that's kind of my opening story here. By the way, David, this is for you. You see this here? This is the patch for the New York Yacht Club. It's got a Latin expression under it that says, "We sail swiftly with swelling sails." But for their sesquicentennial a few years ago, they had some Harvard Latin scholar analyze these words, and the words actually say, "We sail swiftly with inflated sails." And then you'll see this red cross, and this is what's important for you. That's actually latitude and longitude. And the star represents the membership. So the crest here means we know who we are and where we are. So anyway, I kind of get a kick out of that. All right, quick trivia question, then I'm going to go to some pictures. So several years ago, I'm racing one of the J-boats in Newport, Rhode Island. This is Endeavor, the 120-foot J-boat from the 1934 America's Cup. And Ted Turner skippering Shamrock, another boat from the 1930 America's Cup. We have 33 of our best friends on each boat, and it's about a half hour before the start. We're getting things ready. We're just pulling the main up. There's a lot of nervousness, and this launch comes alongside. And a guy in the launch climbs up and comes over. I'm standing at the wheel. He says, "Hey, I'm looking forward to the race today." I said, "Are you invited?" "No, I just come here, and I thought it'd be fun to be on the boat." "You better go talk to the owner, Elizabeth Meyer." Anyway, the guy stayed on the boat for the race. He had the wrong kind of shoes, as you can imagine. And after the race, Elizabeth basically excused the guy, called her launch over. "Thanks for coming." He said, "Oh, I can stay for the second race." "No, we have other guests coming. Thank you very much." So my trivia question is, who's that? Who was the stowaway? His name is Donald Trump. That's as far as I'm going on that topic. So I sailed with Donald Trump, and I've sailed with Bruce Jenner, and I've sailed with Wilt Chamberlain. And none of a damn thing about the sport of sailing, so. But they all wanted to win. All right, so Nat Philbrook's here with us tonight. Nat, thank you very much for coming, and Melissa being here. I just want you to know, when I quote you here, I've got a few of your words. In the book, Diana, that I wrote, I pulled some passages, and I want to read a little essay. And from the museum, James sent me some pictures about 2 weeks ago, the random 150 pictures that are in the archives here, and I'm scratching my head. Well, what do I do with these things? Well, just use them in your lecture if you want. So I went through, and I found so many very cool shots. So I put this little slideshow together I got some music here, courtesy of Aaron Copeland, and here's my little my essay on what sailing is all about here on Nantucket. So I hope you enjoy it. And James, we could record this at another time if you like. So can we go to the, do I do this? I do it here? The down button. Oh, cool. All right, you can see the Dauntless there with the big star taking people out for rides. How lucky that these historic images presented by the Nantucket Historical Association are available to us so we might understand what took place on this windswept island long before any of our time. And these pictures are on display now and inspired me to write a few thoughts. The history of Nantucket really dates back to the last ice age, and more recently, let's just say the last 400 years, the island has evolved into a special place that can be described as romantic, exotic, mysterious, dangerous, beautiful, dynamic, entrepreneurial, remote, and private. The pace of life seems slower here today, but the foundations built by many of the early visitors set the stage for one of the best places to live and visit in the United States, at least in the summertime. It seems like a miracle that this island even exists. We have the Ice Age to thank for the formation of this one-time terminal moraine. It's possible that Norsemen visited here in the 10th century, and there were indigenous peoples here when the first explorers arrived in 1641. The common reference to the Great Lady simply refers to the fog that surrounds the island. The whaling industry in this museum was huge at one time, but gave way to more efficient geography and oil from other places. In 1880s, as you saw earlier, Dauntless, with the big star in its mainsail, took tourists from the town to the beaches. Nice marketing. Sailing as a pastime grew along the East Coast and the Great Lakes about a decade after the Civil War. The New York Yacht Club even built a station here in 1905. Nantucket had been discovered, and sailing has been vibrant ever since. The great sailor and best-selling author, and my friend Nat Philbrook, who will be presenting here next month, told me, quote, "There's a power of place that is underestimated by many people. I think it's a combination of historic forces and spiritual forces, and there is an aura about any place with a deep history. Nantucket is one of those places. When you walk the streets or sail into the harbor, you are seeing a profile of a town with historic buildings. This is a place that has roots to the past. There is an aura that makes sailing special here." During the great growth of America, Nantucket leaders took a cautious approach about development, and as I see, there's still a strong culture to protect the island. I'd add that over my long sailing career, I can't think of any place in America that offers the great sailing conditions that you'll find in Nantucket in the summertime. Hope you enjoyed that. So if we could turn the volume up somehow a little bit. Do I do that or you do that? Okay. All right, we'll continue on. I'm not done. 3 hours, 58 minutes to go. That's me. I got to get it going. We'll give it a little more volume. We need volume. Good. You can turn it up a little bit. So I thought you'd like to see what the Opera House Cup looks like in 100 years from now. That was it. They'll all be vintage boats. Now there's some scenes from the Volvo Ocean Race and Vendée Globe. So this is Sable Island. It's 180 miles east-southeast of Nova Scotia, Halifax, Nova Scotia. And 2 summers ago, I went out there. It took me 2 years to get permission from the Canadian government to actually land on the island. And we spent 3 days. I had a film crew and some archaeologists along. Sable, by the way, is a French word that means sand. And as you can see, this lonely crescent-shaped island out there in the Atlantic is a beautiful place, a mile wide, roughly 26 miles long, but also called the Graveyard of the Atlantic. So here's a little trailer for a documentary I did, The Magic and Mystery of Sable Island. And as you look at this, think of Nantucket with no development. What would it look like here? Sable gives us a clue. Because it's so shallow, we had a small boat, a Sabre 36, and six of us loaded up the boat and off we went. Film equipment, archaeology equipment, and supplies for about 10 days. And off we went. Of course, it was conveniently upwind all the way to Sable Island. But there was fascinating things to see along the way. I grew a beard for the documentary. This osprey came along, and I think he was kind of tired, so we invited him to ride along with us for a couple hours. And after, 2.5 days, we finally made it to Sable and anchored off the beach. Like I said, the only boat allowed to land all summer. There's also 18 species of shark hanging around the isle in case a seal strays a little too far. And we were well aware of the sharks as we took this little rubber dinghy into the beach. There are some people living there, park personnel, meteorologists, and some scientists, and then the 6 of us. So there are 18 people all together on the island. Look how lonely we look out there. And it is a province of the Canadians, and they take it seriously. The island is constantly changing shape with every tide, with every change of the wind. But it's held together by this marram grass that actually goes down 2 or 3 feet. And I love the harbor seals, the gray seals. In the summer, 500,000 of these seals live around the island. Hey, what's up, Doc? They got a little spooked by our cameraman there and a little stampede going back into the water. The seals were very curious about our existence. Interestingly, in the winter, they'll crawl all over the island, but in the summer, they stay by the beach. In 1801, horses were introduced to Sable Island. They came from the Boston area, and generations of them still live. They eat the marram grass, and there are some freshwater ponds, and they can dig down and get some water that way. The sand, however, is devastating on their teeth. But they sure are beautiful. First, we were told not to touch them. We filmed them. They left us alone. We left them alone. They lived in family groups and seemed to appear all over the island. Quite a nice life. There was a time in the 60s where they were going to take them off, but there was such an outcry that they left the horses on the island. Right after World War II, the Canadians built what's called Main Station. We stayed in one of these cabins. The meteorologists sent weather balloons that go up about 20 miles a couple times a day. And there are 4 life-saving stations that were introduced in 1801 with the idea that they'd save lives when ships came ashore and, of course, claim the cargo. So there are a lot of entrepreneurial spirit there trying to claim the cargo. And all these ships and all their cargo is still there. It's just under the sand. So our 2 archaeologists, PhDs, took all kinds of pictures. I mean, it just looked like garbage to me. But boy, they got excited. Oh, look at this, France, 1604. Okay. All right. And there was some new stuff there, too. Modern helmet, old bottles. This mooring buoy is probably 150 years old, and goodness knows where it came from, but there it is. And the Canadians don't take anything away. That's a ship that apparently sank in World War II. Alpheus was the name of it. The Andrea Gale that you'll recall from The Perfect Storm sank somewhere off Sable Island. And the Titanic sent radio signals through the Marconi wireless that was on Sable Island. So that's the way they got the headlines in New York when the Titanic foundered. So you can imagine these horrific events, no GPS. This is the foggiest place in Canada when these vessels would beach and they'd stay there. The most recent beaching was in 1999. And this legend is just horrifying to me to note these are all people, these are all ships that all went down around Sable Island. So this is a J41. Apparently they didn't have a good chart and they ended up, and look what happened within weeks, the sand swallowed it up. So when we arrived 16, 17 years later, there it is, the remnants. It's all under the sand, but look how far the shore is away, which tells you how much it's changing along the way. Very sobering, to say the least. The dunes are anywhere from 80 to 100 feet high. This is called Bald Dune. It was 6 miles from where we stayed. 6 miles out, 6 miles back in the sand. But don't think of me, think of the cameraman that had to take my pictures going up there. The Ipswich sparrow migrates there from Boston area and the east coast of the USA. So I don't know what the future of Sable Island is. Will it survive with climate change and the rising seas? Unclear. But right now, Sable's a place to be appreciated and studied. Hey, off my beach. So a little, take a look at Sable Island and think about Nantucket. Would it be like if there had been no development? So that's the magic and mystery of Sable Island. That's me, 1967. I liked cars. I had a Packard, 1940 Packard, and I loved basketball. And I played basketball, but I wasn't that good at it, and I was always in the intramural team, not the varsity team. But my real passion was sailing. From the age of 6, I sailed as much as I possibly can. I don't think I was very good at it in the early days, but I kept plugging and got better along the way. This regatta, my freshman year, was coming up, and 4 days before the regatta, we had this horrific event, Kent State. This happened, and I'm sailing. All these years later, I wonder what could have been done a little bit differently. What should I have been thinking about? And that weekend, the night before our big Mid-Atlantic Championship, my beloved New York Knickerbockers were playing in Game 7 of the NBA Finals, and I was there. I went to the back door. If you had a uniform on, they would let you in. And my heroes, Willis Reed, Walt Frazier, Dave DeBuscher, Bill Bradley, and the usher, remembering the generous tip that I gave him, $5, sat me behind the bench of the New York Knicks. And next to me was Dustin Hoffman, who'd won an Academy Award. Dustin Hoffman and I sitting behind the bench of the New York Knicks. Willis Reed had been injured. He came out of the tunnel, inspired the team, and it was unbelievable, and the Knicks won it. Because of that victory, they inspired me to sail hard, and I ended up winning, I think, 11 out of 16 races in the Mid-Atlantic Championships, qualifying us for the Nationals, and I was a freshman. And after the game, I got into the locker room. That's me, Howard Cosell, and me in the locker room. God, I had hair, and it was dark. I got all the Knicks autographs, including Dustin Hoffman with the peace sign there. And he was very inspired by those Knicks and ended up winning that regatta. So kind of a little inspiration. But my story does not end there. So basketball, boating, overcoming adversity, Willis Reed, New York Knicks, very much in my mind when 33 years later, I end up in this hospital bed going through a bone marrow transplant for my disease, lymphoma. And let me assure you, it was really tough. and I got mighty depressed. I was laying in this hospital bed, 80 pounds lighter than I am now, could not walk, and not feeling particularly good. That's my wife on the right and me, and you can see I'm not exactly ship-shape at that time. One day I'm laying in this hospital bed about day 23 of the bone marrow transplant, and this nurse comes in and she turns the TV on to lift my spirits, and there was the game. 7 from the NBA Finals is on the television. How did that game get on the television at that moment at the low ebb of my life? And the Knicks won again. And after the game, they went inside the locker room and did the interviews with Howard Cosell, and guess what? There I was on the television 33 years later. I actually, some years later, got to sail with Walt Frazier. Look at that. Your admirer, Walt Frazier. He's my hero, but he likes sailing. So there, look at a mountain man, Willis Reed. There I am getting his autograph. And that moment in the hospital, reminding how that inspired me to win that race, was the moment that I decided I am not done with this disease. It is not going to take me down. So there I am, racing in the IOD Celebrity Regatta in Nantucket, thumb up, life is feeling a little bit better. And one of the things I resolved at the time, if somehow, some way I could get out of this, I would serve others. So I chair the board of the Medical Center. I'm president of National Sailing Hall of Fame, World Sailing, and the Chesapeake Bay Trust and Environmental Group are a few of the groups that I work hard to help out to this day. So, lucky me. That was 15 years ago. I was laying in that hospital bed, and here I am with you. And why should I do this? Let me show you the biggest reason of all. You ready for this? 4 grandkids and a 5th on the way, and they're all going to like sailing. I'm sure I'll get them out in the water. So anyway, that's my little story of overcoming adversity. A little more volume.
All of us had fear, I think, but if he had any, he certainly didn't show it.
I heard what the weather report was. It was a very bad report.
Then all hell hit the fan, and for the next few hours, I don't even remember how many it was. It was pretty darn rough.
It hurt when the waves hit you. The spray at 60 knots, it's like little bullets and pellets hitting your face.
What's going on? This is a boat race. Nobody's supposed to die. The whole world's gone crazy over this thing.
I said 20 people will die tonight. In the first 8 years that I raced sailboats, I never won. I was second almost all the time, but I never won once in 8 years. And then in my 9th year of racing, I went to college and started racing there. My first year in college, I won just about all the time. Those first 8 years, I said I wasn't really losing, I was learning how to win. Sailing was a sport that I felt like I could be competitive in because it takes mostly brains and a good thought process.
Throughout the 1970s, I was Ted's tactician when we won the Southern Ocean Racing Circuit, the Congressional Cup, and probably the biggest event in sailing, the America's Cup. Ted had also won most of the world's ocean races, but the Fastnet race was the one that had eluded him.
We raced it twice in American Eagle. I think we finished 4th overall one time, which is really good with a fleet of close to 200 boats. 4th out of 200 is not bad. Of course, 1st out of 200 is even better.
303 yachts, including that of the 1977 America's Cup winner Ted Turner, have gathered in Cowes for the 28th running of the Fastnet race, the 605-mile classic to the Fastnet Rock and returning to Plymouth.
It was the best competition in the world at the Fastnet race. Everybody was drawn to it. They only had it every other year like the Bermuda race. It drew boats from all over the world.
Ted is really good at organizing a crew. First thing is gives everybody a reason to win.
The initial races before the Fastnet were crew training opportunity for Ted, and he really put us through it.
More wind, we gotta get it down.
So Ted basically gave everybody specific jobs. Everybody knew their job. And the nice thing is he leaves you alone.
Come on, boys.
And it becomes a very cohesive unit.
I don't know how long this wind's gonna hold like this.
You didn't want to be out there with totally inexperienced crew. You wanted as experienced a crew of good, hard-working, tough guys. I had to find somebody that could afford to go, because I didn't buy tickets for the crew. They had to pay their own way. We started last, sailed through the fleet as the evening wore on.
That was my first Fastnet race, so it took me a while to understand the whole geography of the whole race. But coming out of the Solent was exciting. It was still pretty mild. It wasn't really a whole lot going on. Matter of fact, it was pretty light air at one point. I think we began to hear little rumors that there was some weather coming, but I don't think anybody realized how much it was. At least we didn't know about it.
The weather forecast was actually about 5 minutes late coming, and when it finally did, the weather forecaster said we're going to have winds of force 8 to 9, 10 to 11 locally. Well, that means winds over 60 knots, hurricane strength winds. Very ominous when we got that forecast, but Ted seemed to rise up to the occasion. Okay, there's no talk about, well, let's drop out of the race. It was, how do we prepare? Because we want to get to the finish line.
Yeah, it's getting worse.
We issued safety harnesses and told everybody to wear them when they were on deck. That's about all you could do. The biggest worry that I had was that something would break. It was rough.
And at one point, we got a lot of water in the reef mainsail, and they're all looking at this big bubble of water in the mainsail. And it kept getting bigger and bigger every time a wave came over. And I said, Steve, I said, how much do you think this mast can take it? He said, it can't take any more. We figured it must have been 3 tons of water. And I pulled my knife out. And I said, we've got to go slit the mainsail. And Steve said, Ted's going to kill you. I got the knife up and was just getting ready to slit it because I was afraid to lose the mast. And Ted comes up and says, guys, the wind's dropped 3 knots. Shake the reef out. You know, and we were all thinking we were going to go to hell because it was so rough. And here's Ted coming up and saying, we got to keep pushing harder.
The wind came in off the Atlantic Ocean from the west. The ocean shallows up there to just a couple hundred feet from being thousands of feet deep further offshore. And when waves go over deep water, they're pretty large, and they don't break, they just kind of roll in. In the Fastnet race, the waves broke. The top 10 feet broke like a wave breaking on a beach. We were being hit by these waves periodically as they broke, and they just knocked the boat down. The mast almost was in the water, but not quite.
When it got really rough, Ted steered the whole time. And it was very tricky steering around these waves because you couldn't see anything. You had to do it by feel. It was a tricky balance between not slamming the waves because you could break something and not sailing too high because you could rip the sails if they started flapping.
The biggest worry we had, I think, was that we were going to hit another boat because a lot of the smaller boats were still coming up to the rock, and we were going right back down through them.
We were going 10, 12 knots. If we'd hit one of those smaller boats, we would have cut them in half. He seemed to have a whole picture of what was going on outside of us.
Ted Turner was so calm that it gave me confidence that we were going to be okay.
It's not good for the skipper to be nervous. It's best to show confidence that you believe in your boat, you believe in your crew, and that doesn't mean something can't go wrong. It can.
When I got on the helm, he would say things like, take your hat off, you can feel the storm better. And I kind of laugh now. Take my hat off, feel the storm's blowing 60 knots and spray in your face. But he understood that you really wanted to sense what the wind was doing because you couldn't see anything. And the better your senses were, the better you could steer.
Peter Bowker was monitoring the radio, and he'd stick his head up and tell us what he heard, that boats were having a lot of trouble.
Rescue efforts began after 6:30 a.m. this morning as Fastnet participants had been caught in a violent force 10 storm midway between Land's End and Fastnet Rock.
We didn't know where we stood in the race. It was all so confused. Ted was more impatient than I think I've ever seen him. He was almost jumping up and down, and that's because he couldn't get the navigator to get an accurate fix. The point was that if he didn't get an accurate fix, he was going to have to give the Sillies a wide berth. Ted hates to give things a wide berth. When we rounded Fastnet Rock, I thought we were going to hit it.
It was a beautiful day by then. The sun was out and it was clear sky, but there was still a big sea running. And we got one big wave that washed me out of the cockpit, slammed me into the wheel. I bent it, and I ended up in the lee scuppers with Jim Mattingly, the helmsman, sitting on me. But the radio is gone.
The rescue ships and the helicopters were coming and going, and scores of boats were still reported missing. He bumped into me and took me aside, and he said, "Do you realize that back home they all think we're dead? We've been reported lost at sea twice. I mean, they had us listed as missing yesterday."
But we weren't. We were just so far out in front they didn't think to look out there. But we were much ahead of where they thought we'd be. I knew we had a good chance of winning because we had the radio reports of when we went around Fastnet Rock where we were located, and we had a sizable lead over the boats that they reported. And I figured if we were leading that many boats, that we were probably leading the whole fleet. The wind kept dropping. By the time we went across the finish line, we had a spinnaker up again and full mainsail. We kept increasing the sail that we had on to maximize the speed and take advantage of the wind. It was no longer a life or death situation. It was just a nice sail.
When the sun came up about 5:15 that morning, I was feeling a lot better.
We were all happy we had finished and we were alive was the big thing. And we thought we had done well. And that really stuck with me for a long time. I don't think that I could ever be in a race and not push harder than everybody else on board right now. I can see it in Ted. He just inspired all the rest of us to do that.
When we got to Plymouth, the end of the race, all we knew really was that a lot of boats had been in trouble. And we'd heard all the BBC reports in the background coming and going on and off watch. We knew helicopters had been dispatched. It was lousy conditions. And that's about all we knew. We didn't know anyone had died.
We knew a little bit about it. But when we got to the dock, of course, we got filled in completely in it. And it was worse than the radio reports.
Ted Turner paced the Mill Bay dockside for most of the day to check if anyone could beat the corrected time of his 61-foot Tenacious. They couldn't, and the Fastnet Trophy goes to Turner and Tenacious.
After the race was over, I said I was more afraid of losing than I was of dying, and that was true. I was not really afraid of dying.
Winning the Fastnet was a big deal for Ted Turner. He'd won everything in sailing, and the Fastnet was probably the last item to cross off his list.
Another notch in my gun barrel. Winner 79 Fastnet race. It made me feel good.
For all but a handful of boats, the harrowing 1979 Fastnet race is over, and the gales have abated. Wounds are being licked by the fortunate, but thoughts must be spared for the 15 who perished as a result of the fierce conditions and for the loss of 23 boats that have either been sunk or abandoned.
We were struggling too. It was taking everything that we had to keep going. But every race I ever entered, I wanted to win. We had adequate rudders and steering mechanism, everything held together, and we kept going at 10 plus knots. There were a number of people that died in that race. It certainly was a sobering experience, but we knew when we went out racing in the ocean that there were big storms from time to time and that you were taking some risk.
The Fastnet race was a calamity. It's hard to believe that only 87 boats of the 303 boats that started actually finished the race, the deaths. After the Fastnet race, a couple groups were formed, one in the United States, one in England, and studies were put together to see where the rules and regulations could be changed to make ocean racing safer in the future, and that has been a real benefit over the years.
You will not be prepared for everything. The ocean can throw conditions at you that are unmatchable, and it's just inherently a sport that has an element of danger associated with it, and it always will. It always will.
Of the hundreds of trophies you've won over the years in sailing, does the America's Cup loom larger than the rest?
Nah. 79 Fastnet race. But it's a close second.
All right, one more to go here. Part one. All right, thank you. So I'm going to end with one short story and a comment. So first, the short story. This is a bookend from the story that I opened up with. So December 23rd, this past Christmas, my wife and I are going up to New York and Massachusetts to visit grandkids and relatives, and we stopped at the rest stop near mile marker 59 on the New Jersey Turnpike. It was so crazy before Christmas that I went and parked way in the back of the lot there. And when we came back from the concession place, there's a silver Subaru with DC plates parked right next to us. And the couple they were an older couple and like us, and they were putting their Christmas presents in the back seat, rearranging things. And I recognized the husband right away. And to my wife's great horror, I went up to the guy and shook his hand and said, you know, a week ago I was at a meeting in New York, and a good friend of mine showed me a picture of you and him. You were on a soccer team together at your high school, and his name's John Romanier. Oh, Johnny, he says. I remember him. What a great guy. Yeah, the sailing guy. There was no security around. He was very pleasant. We talked for about 2 minutes, and with that, we continued our way up to New York from that. So who's the guy? Robert S. Mueller III. Trump, Mueller, you never know. And then finally, look, I showed kind of an eclectic show. Most of this is new that I threw up on the screen here tonight. So let me first say thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much to all of you here at the museum that hosted this tonight. You're in for a real treat with David tomorrow night, and Nat, sometime in the next few weeks you'll be here. I'll be back for the Opera House. I wouldn't miss it. It's one of the great regattas. I get to sail on American Eagle, so I look forward to that. So remember this last little thing, and that's what the most important thing in the sport of sailing is. The most important thing in sailing, having a good time. Hope you had a good time tonight. Thank you, everybody. All right, thank you.